You're listening to One Free Family, a new take on peaceful parenting, where you can hear ideas for helping to raise free, independent, and peaceful children. Visit onefreefamily.com to connect and listen. Here are your hosts, James and Taylor Davis.
And we're back with another episode of One Free Family. This is James.
And Taylor.
And we are pumped to come talk to you about another listener-driven topic today. And this is a conversation that we've seen come up a few times in our group. We've received a personal message about it. I've seen it in other parenting groups, particularly for people that have two very young kids.
I have seen
more.
it in real life with my own two eyes as well.
Yes, I've experienced this in
and
real life with my own two eyes.
And maybe even in my own family.
Yeah, definitely. And in many, many other families too. And so without any further ado, we'll just jump right into it. So it's essentially not to read any specific email or read any specific comment, but the idea is when someone has two kids, one is around toddler to slightly older than toddler age, say in that 3 to 4 range, and then the other kid is from baby to say 2 range, would that be fair? And the older kid is either being violent with the younger kid or taking their things or just seemingly being randomly way too rough than you think that they know. But when communications issues arise, we're trying to help that kid figure out, why that isn't the right thing to do. And most importantly, how to keep everyone safe.
Right. Essentially, help me, my toddler's hitting my baby. That's kind of where we're coming from here. Because, we really have had multiple people bring this up as a real life challenge that they're facing. And I have dealt with it as a parent. And like you said, James, seen a lot of friends and people go through it as well. So to start, I would say it's common. Yeah, it's
exceedingly common.
It's not a reflection that your child is bad or you're doing something wrong most of the time. Like it really just seems to be quite a common reaction for toddlers when they're kind of processing the emotions around having a new younger sibling.
Right, because there's a lot going on there, right? I mean, not only is this new person, especially if it's the second child, I feel like that's the most common duo.
You mean the oldest child and a second being born?
Child.
Yeah.
That seems to be the most common because that child was used to undivided attention in the home.
Yeah.
Now that child no longer has it, and that is just an incredibly huge life change. They can't always be picked up the moment they want to be picked up. Sometimes their needs aren't attended to, and whether it's explicitly stated or not, they can tell that the reason is this brand new squealing little baby in their house, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a baby, and then when it's a toddler, now there's even more to process, right? Because now this person is in their space from time to time,
taking their things,
knocking their block towers over, like used to happen in our family, tearing apart their train tracks. Like there's just all sorts of different ways that this toddler will complicate. And oftentimes, like that toddler has some need that's being attended to as well that just takes a parent out of commission, and the older kid wants the parent. There's a lot going on. So it's a really hard situation, and I think that's what makes it so common.
Yeah, so I think the first thing that I like to share with people is just that perspective of, like, I empathize and I know that this is really, really hard. And also, it's quite a common part of development for, I think, an older sibling who is getting used to a younger sibling. And so to try to kind of help take people out of that place of fear, right? That fear of like, oh, they're never going to love each other. They're never going to get along. Or I'm scared that there's something wrong with my child because they're being so violent. Like these are all tapes that would play in my head too, when this was happening with our oldest and my newborn at the time. So, and I will say that, like, my oldest is now one of the kindest, most gentle, empathetic people I know.
You can catch him on episode 29.
Yeah. We just talked to him on episode 29. I think he said his whole mission in life is to help people, right? And he like really means it.
Right.
I know he does.
Pull people's hair and smack them in the face and knock blocks out of their hands.
And he would when he was 25 months old when our second child was born, and for the first month or two of our second child's life, I was dealing with him. Any moment that I wasn't fully vigilant, there were moments he would walk up and just smack the baby right in the face.
And about any moment.
What?
Not any moment.
Oh yeah, not any moment. Sorry.
You had to worry about it.
I had to worry about it happening. Yeah. So, that's just to say I was in that place of just a lot of fear about what this meant and what was I doing wrong and was he going to develop normally. And I know it's just one story, but I bet you could ask many parents with kids toddlers who have gone through this and now have grown. He's now a very kind and empathetic and gentle 8-year-old. So there's hope.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another thing that's worth acknowledging is that this is one of the most difficult situations to be in because
it's so triggering.
It's incredibly triggering. And the reason for that are obvious, right? I mean, as a parent, you're going to be hardwired to protect your baby.
Yeah.
And anything
your
hurting your
baby.
Right. Imagine if like some stranger came up and hit your baby, like you would just go totally crazy on that
right.
person. And it's so conflicting because you obviously care just as much for your older child as you do for your baby. But when they take on this role as the very violent aggressor, it feels so much more violent when it's just like this little baby in particular.
Well, I think it's really hard because, right, you have that instinct to protect your baby. So like all of your alarm bells are ringing and going off. And then you have to deal with that feeling of like, oh my gosh, I feel this way towards my own child, right? Like the reaction that you have to your older child who's doing this to your baby. At least for me, I was also then processing some guilt about how angry it made me, if I'm being honest, at my older child.
Yeah, that came through in one of the emails we got too. Like the idea that it was really, like you could tell this parent really focuses on peaceful parenting approaches because she said, I'm finding it so hard to connect with him right now. As when he acts this way, it's just not very likable behavior.
Yeah, and that's I just want to validate that because that's such a reasonable way to feel. And I understand it so much, like that kind of like I'm having such a hard time with this behavior that you are engaging in, and it's making it hard for me to feel connected to you. Like that is so understandable, and I understand also feeling guilty about feeling that way, but it's just real. That's a real authentic feeling.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the other thing that makes it so incredibly difficult too is usually when this behavior is going on, and it actually makes sense, but usually when this behavior is going on, it's at a time in the older child's life where they're not quite yet ready to sit and process your long-winded explanation as to why we don't hit each other. You know?
Right. That's actually something else that came through in this message. The person mentioned that even trying to appeal, I think they said to the older child's sense of empathy wasn't working because this parent wisely recognized that their sense of empathy just wasn't developed to the point where they were able to make that connection. So it is so tricky because, yeah, like you're saying, James, it can be hard to have a reasonable, logical conversation with a child who's just not developmentally ready for that.
Absolutely. And yeah, so there's a lot to take in when it comes to all this stuff. I think it's going to be one of the hardest things when it's happening. I think most people look around and their 14-year-olds don't walk up and just slap their 12-year-old cereal out of their hands or punch them in the face. And if that happens, like obviously that's a pretty serious
there's some other work to be done.
Bullying situation, right? And there's a lot that needs to be done. But just recognize like chances are very, very good that even if another thing that would trigger me would be like the other kid seemed to just not care at all that the little kid was crying. They might even laugh or think it was silly or something
kind of
like
do that, like look at you out of the side of their eye with a little smirk on their face.
Yeah, exactly. That really brings back memories. Like,
I just triggered you by saying that, huh?
Well, you made the face too. and I was like...
I did.
Yeah, I wanted to like harken back to my not so great parenting instincts and become very frustrated with you.
That mischief face, yeah.
Right,
like I know
face.
I'm getting under your skin and I'm getting a reaction from you. And not of, again, like I think if we try to go and look at the underlying need of the child, we can learn a lot more. It's not that child deep down wants to hurt you. There's something else that they need.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so how do we... I think there's a lot of different angles to approach this problem from. I think usually the best place to begin is in the preventative space, and then we can talk about what strategies we can take on after it's happened or when you think it's about to happen. And I think I've seen some interesting ideas here. I think one place I want to start is when this dynamic exists between two kids, it can be very tempting to just want to keep them apart from one another at all times. But I think if we're hoping to build that sense of empathy, that actually trying to intentionally foster connection can be a strategy. Now, you have to tread carefully here because you don't want to kind of dote on the baby and exacerbate the issue where the older kid thinks, oh man, see, she just loves the baby so much and doesn't want my attention. And we only talk when we bring the baby in or whatever. But thing that I do, even still between our kids, is I often point out, oh my gosh, your little brother loves you so much. Look at the way he's looking at you right now. Oh, he really looks up to you. And only when it's true, of course.
Yeah.
But helping them, give them a lens that this young person, they take something from the family.
Yeah, they require a lot of attention from the parents.
They're demanding and they're needy. And they also give a lot back. It's a good feeling to be loved. And it's a good feeling to be loved by...
and admired.
Yeah, a little baby. And now if your baby is like 6 months, they might not convey that. But even when the baby like laughs and smiles at them, make it less about how cute the baby is for laughing, because everyone's going to be constantly commenting about how cute the baby is, almost always, and make it more about what the baby's trying to communicate to the older brother, because there will be moments in your home where the baby's like, oh my gosh, you made her laugh. She's so happy to see you. Oh my, her morning is so much brighter now because you came in. And I think that helps foster the empathy. Comes when the older sibling feels connected to the younger sibling. And when they think, oh yeah, that child brings me joy too. And now that child is sad. That's sad. Not trying to worry about disappointing you, but be more concerned about
how it's affecting that other person.
It's affecting the other person. Yeah. Exactly.
Yep. Like that one.
Cool.
So more on prevention? I have some ideas too.
Go.
Yeah. I mean, this is a common one, and I'm sure that most of you very intentional, conscious parents who are listening, who are struggling with this, have probably found this in some Google searches or conversations on your own, and are trying it, of course, which is just as much prevention as possible. I think that when our children are going through a really intense phase like this, where a toddler is maybe hitting a baby a lot or pushing a baby down when it's crawling around or something like that, just being as present as possible to try to prevent the behavior in the first place is obviously somewhere to start. I recognize that that's easier said than done.
Yeah.
Especially for especially for the households which is probably most of us, where one parent is home with multiple kids for many hours at a time. I understand need to accomplish other things too. But there are little things that we can do to try to cut back on the opportunities for this to happen with our kids. And also to just recognize it's hard, but we're just not at the point where we can really leave the kids alone in a room together. So wearing your baby is one great way to keep your baby close during the times when you do have to get something done. And
off the ground as well.
And off the ground, right. So if you wear your baby while you're getting things done, and by wear your baby, if you don't know what I mean, you have a ring sling or a baby wrap or a baby carrier, that can be a great way. And maybe actually we can post a link to a good website to help people with that if they don't know about baby wearing, because it can be a real game changer. So that can be a way to kind of just have your baby close to help keep them safe. And then I think if you're having time, of course you want to put your baby down sometimes and your baby's going to be on the floor, as much as you can to just be present during that time, whether it means you're kind of sitting right next to the baby so that you can keep the baby safe, or maybe your baby's really happy to roll around and do their own thing for a little bit. So maybe they're down in one corner of the room on a blanket playing with a toy, kind of rolling around, and you're engaging very actively in something with your toddler on the other side of the room, right? So you're there keeping your baby safe, but you're building a block tower with your toddler or doing something. So you're just present as much as possible. Again, I get that this is harder than it is for me to just talk about it and say to do it, but prevention is a big part of it, because I think sometimes too, if we can short circuit the habit and the pattern, we can kind of cut back on the amount of focus we have to put on it by dealing with it happening over and over again. And sometimes that can help to just help a behavior kind of sizzle out. One
of the things that was mentioned...
Fizzle out? That was a weird word. Sizzle? That didn't make any sense. Inaccurate. I think fizzle out.
Yeah, I didn't want to try to correct you.
Well, I just had to interrupt you to correct myself.
Good thinking, because everyone was concerned that maybe you
sizzle, what is she talking about?
So good on your vocabulary.
I just have a lot on my mind all the time, so sometimes I say the wrong word.
Yeah, well, this time you corrected yourself, so well done. One of the things that came up in multiple conversations of these is that talking doesn't seem to work. I think what most people are acknowledging is that talking about this right after it's happened, and there's a crying baby and a kid who's probably feeling uncomfortable or
in a heightened emotional state.
Yeah, definitely at least a heightened emotional state. Just it's probably a rather complicated cocktail of emotions that they're feeling at that time. But I think in the preventative measure, like let's say you were wearing the baby and cooking because you're the super parent and you're just getting it all done at once. Then you come back and now it's going to be time to play. I think it's okay to bring up at that time, hey, I'm going to put Charlie down now. Are we feeling like it's going to be a safe environment for Charlie right now? Kind of bring it up in a non-confrontational, not judgmental way, or say something like, hey, I was hoping that we could all sit down and play right now. I want to make sure Charlie is going to be safe. This doesn't break the habit or take the emphasis off it, but I think it brings it up in a way where your kid can also see, that if we can keep a safe environment, I can sit down and play. But my top priority, of course, is keeping everyone safe.
Yeah.
And so the kid, even if because they're not in the state yet, right? They're probably not sitting there planning, ooh, as soon as Charlie gets on the ground, I'm going to smack him.
Right.
It's probably usually an impulsive decision. Like, oh, mom keeps looking over at Charlie.
I need the attention back on me.
Or I'm mad at Charlie or whatever is going on, right? And that puts the ball into their court. And then that can be a follow-up thing. Now we put Charlie down. Charlie's going and gone. We're building a block tower. Other kid decides to throw a block at Charlie. Oh, I guess it's not a safe environment for us right now.
Yeah.
And you just pick Charlie up, and we're helping Charlie get back to some state of equilibrium. And while talking doesn't always work, I think setting the stage and allowing your child to observe the cause and effect that their actions actually are having on the family, which is taking the peace out of the home. I still think that child, most children just have a need for peace in the home, whether they would talk about it that way or not. And demonstrating, asking first, and then following up if it doesn't feel like a safe environment without screaming, without yelling, can see like, oh, well, that wasn't that great. Like we were playing blocks. It wasn't ideal that Charlie was on the ground taking some attention, but it was a heck of a lot better than having to play by myself. Well, it's not like you're not overtly trying to punish anyone or teach them a lesson, but it's just like the fact of the world, right? Like my top priority has to be keeping people safe. And most people just do appreciate that being a top priority once they realize that it applies to them as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. So now it's happened, right? For whatever reason, our best laid plans didn't work out. We're in the moment and we're feeling that triggered feeling. I'd love to talk about how we proceed from here because we've talked about many, many, many times on the show before. Trying to prepare for this in advance is going to be a lot better than trying to just run in and say, oh, well, the next time it happens, I'll handle it better. You won't, by the way. You
need a more specific plan.
Yeah, you're not going to, just the intention to do better isn't going to work as well if you don't have a plan for what that might look like, where you haven't visualized
because going back
through that situation.
Yeah, going back to what we were saying before, this is probably one of the most triggering situations for a parent, right? To have this conflict between your own two children, especially when one of them is this kind of defenseless, vulnerable baby. So you are going to be triggered. And if you don't have, like you said, maybe if you don't visualize yourself responding to it, and exactly how you hope to respond to it, the intention to do better, I have learned from experience, is often just not enough.
Yeah, actually, it can wind up going the other way. You have the intention, you don't execute on it, then you feel guilty or have more resentful feelings.
That's never happened to me. I have no idea what you're talking about.
Just totally out of left field on this one, just speaking hypothetically, of course. But I actually think this also applies to, back to like the disagreements episode we talked about, for any sort of like frequent conflict that happens in the home, because this can happen between older kids too. Like, we've experienced this recently with, there's certain like competitive activities that frequently lead to conflict in our house. Yeah. And when we don't make a plan beforehand, like we just say the same thing, they respond in the same way.
Yeah. And it just escalates. Back to square one. Right. Yeah. So let's talk about like what that plan could look like. And it might obviously look a little bit different. It might obviously look a little bit different for each child and each family, just depending on what you know about your kids and yourself and stuff.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess I'll talk about how I've tried to approach it in the past, and people can apply this as it relates in their house. The first thing for me always is the moment I notice something like this happen, to be extremely vigilant to prevent it from happening again right in that moment, right? Because one thing I've seen a lot of times is,
so you mean like get in there and make sure it doesn't...
Don't hit your baby sister, and then they just hit the baby sister. I said don't hit your...
Right, so you mean getting in close and making sure to stop it from continuing.
Physically intervening in some capacity. Yep. And like instead of restraining the older kid, because that can feel like a infringement upon their autonomy, if possible, I like to, kind of
pick up the baby
or defend the younger child. Sometimes it's a toddler, or you can, physically stand in the space between them. Yep. This can be hard if you're not like, and it sounds weird. I know I doubt anyone would be like actually like scared for their life with their 4-year-old, but like a 4-year-old can hurt you. Like,
yeah. And it's also very triggering to be hit by your child.
Yeah. Exactly. That is true as well. And so I figuring out a safe way for you to intervene without escalating yourself, but really prioritizing that. And even as my approach as well is to also talk about it. Oh, it looks like I'm going to have to keep Charlie safe right now. We don't have a kid named Charlie, by the way. It's hypothetical Charlie here. And so pick up Charlie, make sure everyone is staying safe, make sure that we prevent that, and try to calmly explain that you're going to do your best to prevent this from happening. We've talked about the language of, we don't do this in our family, or, we can't have Charlie feeling unsafe right now.
I can't let this happen in our house. Yeah.
I'm going to do my best to not let this happen, because sometimes one of our friends pointed out, I can't let this happen. Well, you just did let this happen.
That's a good point,
so
right?
You're totally capable of letting this happen.
Right.
But trying to get some sort of precise language, because I do think that helps. And, really starting by prioritizing safety, because that ultimately is your priority too. It's not to yell at anyone or make them feel ashamed. And I think also approaching it, like one of the things I want to keep in my head mentally, an expectation I want to have, is that what follows after this might not have an immediate impact.
Right.
And that sounds like a small distinction to me.
No, I was going to actually have a whole conversation about, I was going to do it later, just around this whole topic, but you can say what you want to say now.
No, I think you should say what you're going to say now, because it perfectly applies. I think having this level of expectation going in is going to be paramount to having a reasonable expectation or understanding for what you can expect to come next. Because if you expect that we're going to give you the perfect 10 words and that your kid's not going to hit anymore, don't, because that's not going to work.
Well, right. That's what I was going to say later towards the end of it, but I can just say it now, which is kind of encouragement to reevaluate our expectations around how our response to this behavior is going to solve the problem in terms of like the timeline and things like that. Because we've talked about this before, but parenting in a way that is gentle and respectful and non-punitive is not going to have immediate results when it comes to like undesirable behaviors in our children. If we went ahead and hit our kids when they hit other people to try to teach them not to hit, it may stop them from hitting when we're around, and it may stop it right away if it's that upsetting for them, but it's not really solving the problem. It's not helping them develop empathy for their child, for their sibling. It's not helping them develop a true understanding of why we don't hit people because we've just hit them. So that's very confusing. It's not sending a consistent message, although it may look like it has solved the problem in the moment because our kid may stop out of fear. But when we try to support them in a more gentle way, it may mean that this hitting behavior continues for a while until they're really able to internalize these messages. And that's why we have to be so much more vigilant, probably, and more present, and also more patient with the timeline in which this problem is going to be solved. It will eventually go away. I really believe that. It will stop and it will change, but it's not going to always be immediate. It's a long game.
Yeah, the seed planting analogy comes to mind here, where you can't just plant a seed and start yelling at it to grow, where these conversations, you might not even realize
you need to nurture it and water it
that it's even doing anything at all until it finally starts to bear fruit. But I think you don't want to give up on trying to talk things through because it didn't work the first time or the first 50 times, frankly. Yeah. And I think another good thing to point out about hitting in response to hitting, because this is I think an important distinction. This actually came up in a different thread in our One Free Family Facebook group, where somebody basically was like, I don't want to, they were talking about when kids take things from one another, and they were like, well, I don't want to take it back because that shows them that you can solve your problems by taking things back. And I think there's an important distinction to be made here, where if someone steals something from someone else, you actually do make that other person whole by taking the item and giving it back to them. It's still not perfect. You'd rather talk to them first and so on. But in this case, you don't make your baby whole by hitting your older child.
Right. That doesn't solve the problem.
That doesn't, and it doesn't help your baby. It doesn't stand up for them. It doesn't do any of those things. And I know that it can feel extremely desperate when this type of thing is happening. And I want to empathize with that. And I think if our goal is to have people not be using violence as a solution in our home, we need to not be taking that into our own hands as well. So, yeah.
Can I share a little bit about my process, like what I might do in terms of having a plan going in?
Yeah.
I think that this hasn't been an issue, this particular thing in our home in a while, but if I were dealing with it again, just kind of thinking out loud here, if I wanted to have a plan for going into the next time this happens, I think I would try to keep it pretty simple for myself and pretty specific. And I think the first thing for me, and this is often a plan that I have, I don't always achieve it, but would be when this happens, would be first for me, would be like as I'm moving towards the conflict, I would try to remember to take a deep breath, which sounds really simple, but for me, it kind of just helps reset like my nervous system when I can start feeling like those alarm bells going off. So it would be to take a deep breath and prevent it from continuing. Like you said, James, picking up the baby or the toddler or getting in between the kids or whatever you need to do. So it would be take a deep breath, prevent it from continuing. And then I would even try to have something in my mind, like a couple different just sentences that I could say, like, I'm going to help us have this stop, right? Or I'm going to try not to let this happen in our house, or a couple things that I can just say. And then for me, I would probably like, that might even just be it. It would just be, and then just kind of removing the baby from the toddler for a few minutes so that everybody could just calm down. And even if the toddler followed me, that's okay. But just kind of keeping the baby safe. I think that in an ideal world, I probably wouldn't try to have long conversations with my toddler about it in the moment. I might simply also point out, your sister's really sad right now. She just got hurt. You just hurt her. But I think I would probably just leave it at that. But the biggest part of my plan for myself, I think, would just be to be able to take that deep breath and tell myself in my head, this is not an emergency, even though it's very upsetting and very
once
sad.
Once the other kid is safe, it's no longer an emergency.
Exactly. Yeah. And just to be able, so that I can like bring my own state back to equilibrium, because I never can handle things well when I'm really heightened in terms of my emotions. So just a couple reminders to myself, even if I had to like post that up on the wall where these things happen most of the time as a reminder, I might even do that, because again, when we're so triggered, it's so hard to go back to that place of kind of calm and reasonable response.
Well, right. And I think another thing that can be even more triggering is when you try to talk about it and the kid laughs or ignores you or tries to do it again, like then you just can get down the spiral. And I think, again, reasonable expectations around how this conversation will go will really help here, where I like the idea of talking about it maybe a little bit more than you do, talking about, Charlie's really sad right now. Mm-hmm. It's probably really upsetting for him when someone so much bigger than him tries to hurt him. Mm-hmm. He's probably really confused too, because he loves you so much. And when you hit him, you can see how upset it makes him.
So you're trying to plant those seeds of empathy, even if they don't connect yet, thinking that over time they will.
Yeah, Charlie trusts you, and it's probably really upsetting for him when you hit him.
And I will say, like, I know there is a lot of advice, and I fall back on it too, to not over talk with toddlers. And I think we do need to be careful, but I will say that you doing that with our kids, like I have seen like months down the line, one of our kids will, on their own, spontaneously share a reflection based on those things that you have said to them. And I think that like, I do see those seeds kind of growing and blooming. Yeah.
And so there's that's like the underlying level, like the part where we hope to get them, just pointing out, helping them to observe, because they might think in their mind, or some instinct that they have is get mom back in here, get mom's attention. Right. Yeah. And they just might not even be considering the other facts. Like in their heart, they could really love Charlie. They,
I'm sure they do.
Right.
Yeah.
They probably do, because that's how we work most of the time. And it might not even occur to them to connect those dots. And so, you start connecting them, and you write the outline first, and then you go over it a few times, and eventually the kids will understand that making that decision, they'll see the downsides of it as well. And that's why, I also, in planting the seeds, enough with the planting of seeds analogy for now.
I know, it's a good one.
I know, but this is what I'm saying is not quite the same thing.
All right.
In letting them know prior to all hanging out, in particular, like I hope that we can all hang out and have fun right now. Mm-hmm. And then when they can see, like a thing one can say to start is like, oh, I need to stop playing and help Charlie.
Yeah.
It's okay to like help them to see the cause and effect of, because you want them to build the empathy for sure. And when they just see like, nothing good happens for them in this. Nothing bad has to happen, but they're not going to accomplish any great sneaky goal of, you're not going to like, oh, well, Charlie's crying, I'll stop cooking and play with my other kid,
Yeah.
And if they're not responding, or if they're not seeing that, it's probably, again, because they just don't have the tools to see all that yet.
Right.
And so when we can give them a more clarity on how to understand the situation, it might not curb the instinct immediately, but it can at least continue to observe the patterns in their life. Mm-hmm. They will figure it out eventually. I do strongly believe that.
I think also having a conversation, and I know we've talked about this before, again, depending on how old your child is, this conversation is going to look very different if the child is 2 versus 4 or 5 or 6. But having a conversation when they're not in that heightened emotional state can be helpful, just in terms of brainstorming alternatives with them. Right. So in the moment, again, this might not be so effective, but with your child together as a team, talking about, how were you feeling when you did that? Were you feeling mad? Were you feeling frustrated? And honoring that feeling and validating that feeling, that it is okay to feel that way. Yeah. And then when we feel mad, it still isn't okay to hit. So what else could you do when you feel that way? And your child, depending on their age, might have some really great ideas so that when it happens again, or when it maybe looks like it's going to happen again, you can remind them of what they wanted to try instead. And if they're too little to have their own ideas, you can give them an idea that you think might work, just in terms of something else they can do, whether it's come find you and ask for a snuggle, or whether it's, simply recognize that feeling and just walk away for a minute, even if they need to walk away and just like be by themselves for a minute, whatever is going to work for your child. I think just, again, planting the seeds of alternative ways to express the emotion that they're feeling, and reminders that the emotion itself is okay to feel. Yeah,
I think that's a great point. The validating the emotion and trying to help them make a different plan for when that emotion arises.
And that's all part of recognizing that they may not yet have the tools. And so here we are trying to give them some tools and help them build some of those tools or add those tools.
Yeah, and I think in the same vein, sometimes we've kind of been talking about the most extreme case when the kid is not capable of identifying what need they had, and maybe we did it backwards a little bit. But the other piece, especially for kids that are getting a little bit older, is, hey, pick the baby up, keep the baby safe, or the younger child safe, and say, hey, you hit Charlie, what's going on? Oh, Charlie keeps knocking my block towers over, basically inviting a conversation instead of yelling at them for doing the wrong thing, saying something like, oh, I can't let people solve their problems in this house by hitting. Is there something going on that you need right now? Yeah. And they can say, yeah, Charlie keeps crawling over and messing up my train tracks. Like, oh, would it be helpful right now if I helped you so you could focus on playing and I, kept Charlie over here, or, could I put Charlie on my lap and we could all play together and I could just make sure his hands don't keep knocking the train tracks, helping them to see that you take their problem seriously.
That's awesome.
That it's not all about, because obviously the priority has to be keeping the baby safe, or the toddler, the youngest kid safe.
But the way that you're explaining it is you're doing it in like a collaborative approach of, like we've talked about, like how can we work on how can we fix this together, or how can we work through this together?
Yeah. Or, and again, validating the big feelings. If the kid is in a space to have this conversation, like, you were working so hard on that block tower and then he knocked it over. Like, that must have been really frustrating.
Right. Doing that doesn't condone the hitting. It's okay to validate the feelings that they had that led to the behavior. That's not okaying the behavior. You can do that and still say, that was really frustrating for you. I saw how hard you were working on that. It's still not okay to hit because you're frustrated. So how can we help you?
Yeah, that's back to the emotion is okay.
Yeah.
The actions that you took in response were not okay.
Yeah.
And again, that helps them build that coherent worldview that they can understand. Okay, mom, because I think one of the biggest feelings that tends to exacerbate this situation is when the older kid doesn't feel like the parent understands.
Right. They feel like all of a sudden it's like a me versus mom and the baby thing.
Exactly, because the parent comes in and they seem to place zero value on the tower that felt really important to the kid at the time. And sure, in reality, not hitting is more important than any block tower. But that block tower feels like the most important thing in the world to that kid in the moment. That's why they were working so hard on it, right?
Right. So if you can connect with them over that, it's so much easier to work on the undesirable behavior when your kid feels connected to you.
Now imagine, and if you could put yourself in the kid's shoes, being, I guess this will date our generation because this really actually just doesn't happen anymore. But when you were almost done with your paper in college and the computer froze and crashed, and you lost the whole thing, or the power went out or something, right? And that level of kids are taking their work and the things that they're doing
it's just as important,
just as seriously as you when you're doing something that's really important to you. And that can help when there's a specific reason.
Yeah.
Because sometimes the toddler just comes over and like hits the baby and you just don't have no idea why.
And it doesn't mean there's not like an underlying thing going on in their mind.
But there's like no real great conversation to be had there, right?
Yeah.
But when it's like a 4-year-old and there's a 1-year-old, like there's hope for identifying the cause that happened to come up in that exact moment and, going out of our way to validate that. I think many people's fear is that they don't want that older kid to feel understood. They don't want
They
him
just
to
want them to be suffering, not because it feels good to have them suffer, but that's how they want them to learn not to do it again.
Yeah, they just really don't want that kid to have any justification almost. Yeah. And I think I get that instinct too. Like you don't want the kid to be basically victim blaming the toddler or the baby and say like, oh, well, she deserved it because she knocked my block tower over. Well, that's not it at all. It's more that it was a frustrating situation and we can acknowledge that. And given that it's frustrating and you can see that I understand that it's frustrating, now maybe you can trust me to help you find a different solution, right?
Yeah, I think that's huge.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I think we're getting pretty close here.
Well, I have one other thing. And again, this is pretty common advice that many people listening will probably have seen. And I think it's worth mentioning, which is also in a situation where you have a new baby and a toddler who was the only child, especially, and was really used to this really, really intensive one-on-one relationship with their parent. Right. Just trying to find a way to keep the strength in that relationship, however you can, really for both of you. So whether that means, taking some time one-on-one with your older child when you have another adult in the home, and just trying to be conscious of remembering, like, when is the last time I was able to just really spend even 15 minutes one-on-one with my older child to kind of fill their cup. And I think also to fill your cup in terms of having positive feelings toward your child, because if you feel like you're always in crisis management or prevention of the baby getting hurt with your older child, you are unfortunately having to spend a lot of time in that negative headspace of, I don't like this behavior that my older child is exhibiting, and it's making me feel really frustrated with them a lot of the time. So if you can snag little pockets of time to do something really fun, even if it's just like rolling around on the bed and playing airplane or wrestling or whatever your kid likes, drawing a picture, reading a book, where you don't have the baby at the same time, that can help them have their cup filled in terms of their relationship with you. And also, I think it can help you remember all of the things that you love so much about that older child of yours.
Yeah, that's a great call. I think that also fits in with what we talked about really early on, which is those things we can do to prevent stuff. Well, and it does prevent makes it sound like it's a one-shot fixes everything sort of situation. That's not how it is. But to build those relationships and to nurture that might address one of the key underlying issues, which is I used to have you all to myself and now I'm feeling really jealous and upset. Yeah. And, I can never name those emotions. Something just feels kind of wrong right now. Put my finger on it. Yeah. But yeah, that feeling of, things are back to normal for a little while, or I have this person's undivided attention.
It's huge.
Yeah. It really is huge. And it's hard too. I want to acknowledge that, because when you're home with multiple kids and one of them is really young, like if that baby is napping or, whatever, and the other kid is like kind of into something, it can be really tempting to just take those moments for yourself. And totally, I get it. Even if you just still need to, like, you should continue to do that if that's something you really need right now. And if this episode, like you say, you found this episode specifically because this is what's going on and someone recommended it to you, which I know happens from time to time, now might be the time to, the best thing you might be able to do for your own self-care is to heal that relationship with the older child. Totally. And then once things are back to a state of more equilibrium, then you can take some of those further self-care measures too. Yeah, I agree. I have one more thing I want to talk about. I think something that I see happen, especially with parents who are trying really hard to be gentle and peaceful, is I think sometimes we can go too far in the direction of being permissive of this type of behavior on the part of our older sibling to our younger sibling. And again, this is just my opinion. I'm not an expert on any of this, but I have found for me, and I think for our whole family, it's been really important, no matter what, to hold on to the value of we don't solve our problems or we don't communicate aggressively in this family, or that's what we're working towards, right? We all make mistakes and it happens. But I think sometimes, especially if the baby
doesn't seem too bothered, like let's say it's not just the toddler walking up full on smacking the baby in the face or something, if it's just like kind of some minor roughness,
knocks them over when they're crawling.
Yeah. I know that a lot of people, and again, I don't know what's right or wrong, just the approach that we've taken. I know some people can be tempted to just let it go. For me, that just has never felt right, because I just think that if a culture of kind of general roughness from a stronger, bigger person to a smaller, more vulnerable person is developed, like if that behavior is permitted, I think that culture can kind of snowball. And, we just take bodily autonomy and aggression very seriously in our family. And it doesn't mean that we shame our kids for it, but we notice it and we mention it when it happens, and we keep working on helping our kids to not communicate in that way and not solve their problems in that way. And I have to say too, that I have adult friends who have said that they are carrying trauma from their childhood, in terms of their parents being permissive of their older siblings being rough with them. Like I've had multiple adult friends express that. And I really don't want that to be a situation that my kids have to deal with when they're older. So, I know it can be tempting, especially if the little one doesn't seem upset, to just let it go. But for me, I just have to name it when I see it and make sure that culture doesn't begin to develop in my family.
Yeah, I think it's nice to let everyone know, first of all, the younger kid, whether they can verbalize it or not, that you're going to be working to keep them safe.
Yeah.
And I think for the older kid too, to not think that that's the type of thing where like you're going to intermittently sort of chime in on, like having a few things, in our family, we don't have nearly as many expectations of our kids as many people do. And the ones that we do, we hope to have totally consistent expectations. Don't hurt people. Don't take their things.
Yeah.
And we're going to start there. Don't do anything that's going to get our family arrested, or, there's like a few different things. But yeah, once we are all on the same page in terms of those things, then I feel like everyone has a more secure foundation.
Yeah, because I think little people can't always voice it when they're feeling unsafe. And I just want to make sure that my little people know that I'm doing everything I can to help them to feel safe, even if they don't have the words to express that they may be feeling a little bit threatened or anxious.
Yep. I hear you. All right, man.
Are we good?
I think we're great.
All right. So thank you so much for joining us on this journey. And just remember that each moment is a new opportunity to be the parent that you want to be.
Love you guys. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to One Free Family. If you enjoy the podcast, please show your support by becoming a patron at onefreefamily.com/support. Your support will help make this show better. Plus, you can get access to rewards and additional episodes by joining. Again, that's onefreefamily.com/support. This has been a Pax Libertas Productions podcast.